about today is the hype versus reality in battery chemistries. Now, I'm not saying silicon is reality and lithium metal is hype. Some of my friends in the industry were like, why'd you put lithium over hype? I was like, actually, they're offset, but just, so no one has to worry. I'm not saying lithium metal is hype. And I'm also not saying that all silicon is reality. There's a lot of hype in silicon. So I'm going to try to be as unbiased as I can, even though I'm the CEO and founder of GDI, and GDI is focused on 100% silicon anodes. I'm really going to try to shoot it down the middle what my personal belief is and what the actual data tells you. So let's get started. Why are we all here? We're all here because this market is literally and figuratively exploding in some cases. So you're talking about a market that is going to be the new oil and gas. It's in your cell phone, your laptops, your electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And the component market alone, according to McKinsey, and that's just the anode cathode electrolyte separator, is going to be $250 billion by the end of the decade. And then it's probably going to just grow onward and onward forevermore. At least that's what we're all hoping for job security. Now, what's happening, though, is it is segmenting. Okay, it is segmenting into the low performance, lower cost, the medium performance, middle cost, and high performance, premium cost cell chemistries. Right now, you can definitely say that China sort of has a firm grip on the graphite LFP, and with CATL making their announcements recently about sodium, I wouldn't be surprised if sodium's not far behind. As many of you from many different industries probably know, don't have a price war with China. They win every single time. So really, I'm sidestepping that whole part of the market by saying it's most likely going to be dominated by CATL, BYD, and many of the Chinese players, which brings us to the medium performance. So that's about up to 10% silicon, 90% graphite, and most of that is a nickel-containing cathode, NMC, NCA, maybe a lithium cobalt oxide for things like consumer electronics. And that's dominated by LG, Samsung, SK, Panasonic. Moly makes some really quality cells. Tesla, I guess if you consider them their own cell maker, also makes high quality, high performance cells. And really, if you want to get involved in that segment of the market, you're really going to be a material provider to those players. It's going to be very hard to go head to head with them making cells unless you're making it for niche businesses, which I will get into a little bit. And that leaves us with a high performance premium cost, at least in the short run. I do believe that these materials will come down in cost a lot as volume increases and maturity increases. And that's where I think we're gonna spend most of our time in new technologies. So if you're developing new technology, this is where you can still make a name for yourself. It's not already taken by massive companies. And this is where North America and Europe have the greatest opportunity. So what are the main issues with batteries today? I mean, you can really narrow them down to these four. That's slow charging times. People want their EVs to charge faster. Energy density. They want them to drive further. Safety concerns. They don't want them to blow up. And then supply chain risks, where we really would like a more secure and domestic supply chain to feed into these commercial cells. And right now, if you look at all of these, graphite is sort of the weak link of all of these things. If you try to charge it too fast, it plates lithium, it limits the energy density. It's the first SEI to fail during thermal runaway at 80 degrees. And 90+% is currently dominated by China, both synthetic and natural sources of battery-grade graphite. It doesn't matter if it comes from Madagascar. It goes through China and processed in China. So what do we really need to get everyone to give up their gas cars? Well, some people may never give up their gas cars. Some people have said, no, I'm going to die driving a gas car. But for the most people, it's really, can you get to over 500 miles? Can you charge over 250 miles in 15 minutes? And can you make these no compromise, right? They don't want to switch from a gas to an electric where they're compromising their ease of use. They're causing anxiety. They want their cell phones to last longer, even if they have AI. They want VTOL that can fly from destination to destination without having to stop 3 times. And ultimately, this will also lead to Europe and North America having more attractive cell and pack costs, because by increasing the energy density of the cells, you lower all the overhead, the labor, and everything else. So there are 5. We're going to start with 5 different anode technologies today, and then I'm going to start to down select as we move. This chart might be a little hard to read. I couldn't come up with a perfect way to say it, so I'm going to voice over a little bit. Lithium metal obviously is the king of gravimetric watt hours per kilogram. Silicon dominant is sort of the king of watt hours per liter in fast charging. Graphite SiOx is the standard anode that's in most of your lives today. Metal oxides are some of these new materials that have very, very fast charging and amazing cycle life, but they have very low energy density. And these materials tend to be much more expensive than the other materials I've discussed so far. And then last but not least, this is silicon carbon composites. So if we're specifically looking at what's going to get us to the next phase, we got to narrow this down a little bit. And let me be very clear. If anyone comes to you or brings to your attention a technology that hits it out of the park in all 5 of these areas, you should be very, very skeptical, because that's not how physics and chemistry work. That's not how the universe works. You are not going to have any chemistry that does all 5 of these things well. Everything in lithium-ion batteries or electric chemical storage, period, is a trade-off. I'll give you one example. Ultracapacitors can actually charge in a few milliseconds. But guess what? They only have 6 watt-hours per kilogram compared to a state-of-the-art Panasonic cell at 250 watt-hours per kilogram. So when people say, oh, we charge really fast, what you should actually be asking is, how many watt-hours per liter or how many watt-hours per kilogram do you charge in 5 minutes? Not 10 to 80. 10 to 80 means nothing. It's absolutely meaningless. 10 to 80 of what? So when I talk about fast charge, let me be clear. I mean fast charge per unit of energy. That's all that really matters. Everything else is just semantics. So we narrowed that down to lithium metal, silicon dominant, which is over 51%, and silicon carbon composites, for the most part, are anywhere from 10 to 45% silicon and the rest carbon. And if you look at these two, silicon carbon composites are sort of the utility knife. They're not amazing at any one thing, but they're sort of decent at everything. And so they'll probably have a very broad usage. Then you look at lithium and silicon. Those are the ones that are really going to push the energy density envelope. Those are the ones that are really going to dramatically change the runtime, the range, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to down select a little bit there as well. I'm not saying that silicon carbon composites doesn't have a stake in the future. I actually think it will get to market before lithium metal. I think it will get to market before silicon dominant. But I think it's, at the end of the day, for the applications we're talking about, it is going to be limited in terms of what kind of energy it can actually achieve. And because of that, it will, in some cases, be more expensive. So let's dig in a little bit. Cycle life, right? So one of the reasons that silicon carbon is preferred is it does tend to have longer cycle life than both lithium metal and silicon dominant. And the question is, why is that important? Why is that important? All right, at the end of the day, if the end user has to choose between energy density, fast charging, and cycle life, are a lot of people actually going to go with cycle life? I think if you talk to people about why they aren't buying EVs, many people will tell you not enough range. Many people will say it doesn't charge fast enough. Very few people go, well, mine died before warranty. I mean, I've been driving an EV since 2018. I know very few people who have not been able to replace a battery pack if it was defective, and I've already put almost 100,000 miles, and I'm still doing pretty well. Why is that? Because cycle life doesn't really tell you what you want to know. You want to know how many miles you're going to get. You want to know how many hours your cell phone's going to last, days, months, or years, right? Cycle life, apart from energy throughput, is sort of non-existent. So first, I want to say that silicon has been able to achieve over 300 watt hours per kilogram and 800 watt hours and long cycle life. So shout out to Ion Blocks and Herman, who I know pretty well over there. They were able to do that. But how did they do that? They did that with advanced electrolytes and pre-lithiation. So the question is the customer going to want to pay for the extra lithium, the pre-lithiation, some of these electrolytes, and all the ways that you have to manage the cell? The jury's out. But what Stellantis basically was saying is, look, we really just need to make the 150,000 mile warranty. We need to hit our warranties, our drivetrain warranties. That's not going to be what convinces someone to buy a car. It's going to be that range, that fast charging, the usability, the acceleration. So really, cycle life, although it has become this obsession with 1,000 cycles, what Stellantis was saying is, wait a second, if we make a really efficient car and a really high energy density cell, cycle life becomes far less necessary. So for example, we make a 600-mile vehicle, which is sort of the battle between Tesla and Lucid right now. Let's say one of them achieves it. One of them gets to 600 miles. To hit the warranty, they need 300 cycles. That's it, 300 cycles to hit their warranty and to last for over a decade. So really, it sort of puts this obsession with 800 to 1,000 cycles maybe is slightly misguided, but car companies aren't going to care until you tell them it affects their cost. until you say, okay, you really want your 1,000 cycles, you're going to have to pay for the electrolyte that enables it, the pre-lithiation that enables it, all these other things that enable it. And eventually when they have to choose, I wouldn't be surprised if having the higher energy and the faster charging and the slightly lower cost is where they end up, but the future will tell. We don't know today. Now, Panasonic has come out and said by 2031, we want to be at 1,000 watt hours per liter. Why is that? Because I think they're really in touch with what the high-end automotive companies want, such as Tesla and a lot of the others that they talk to. And they realize at that point, we reach parity with gas cars. We have the same range as gas cars. We probably can charge as fast as gas cars. Well, where is silicon carbon composite today in search of that? Well, Moly's cell and Group 14 came out with this amazing new cell that Moly announced in AABC Europe. And this is a power cell that has really fast charging, really high power, and it hit about 265 watt hours per kilogram and 714 watt hours per liter, about 10% better than a Panasonic state-of-the-art today. Then, at the conference, the crowd asked, well, what's the limit, Moly cell? How much silicon do you think you can actually get in a cell? And Moly said 20 to 30%, 20 to 30%. At that point, it's really going to cause issues with expansion, contraction, the foil, and other things. So therefore, their target is 290 and 850 watt hours per liter using Group 14 material. Well, that by definition isn't going to get you to 1,000. And why is that? It's all math. So key thing that everyone needs to get in the habit of doing, stop listening to press releases, stop listening to one-liners, and start digging into the actual numbers. And the numbers that you need to know are the gravimetric energy density rating of the anode material, the density of that anode, the loading of that anode, milliamp hours per centimeter squared or milligrams per centimeter squared, and then what the volumetric energy is going to be after expansion if the material does expand, which all three of these expand. So you have to figure out after expansion, what is it? Now, silicon carbon expands the least, silicon expands the second least, and lithium will expand forever unless you put megapascals of compression on it. So once you actually dig into the numbers, even if we give everyone the benefit of the doubt of giving them all the energy, when you multiply it by the density of the anode, and then you multiply it by the average aerial loadings that they're capable of demonstrating with third-party, and you need third-party data, unfortunately. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but a lot of people are willing to exaggerate, so you really need third-party data. When you do that, that's when you're going to actually understand what is the limit of energy density, what is the limit of fast charging, what kind of external compression do I need to make it manageable, what kind of electrolytes do I need to hit cycle life. And this is where silicon carbon, like I said, is sort of good at everything and it has the best cycle life. But this is where silicon really starts to shine, because if you think about, oh, I care about volumetric energy, I care about how much energy I can put in my cell phone, in my laptop, in my VTOL, in my car, in all these things that are constrained by space, by volume. The math starts to tell you, oh, well, actually, it's not that hard. There's really only one option to getting to 1,000 watt hours per liter, and that's 100% silicon. There's only one real option to get to 1,000 cycles, and that's silicon carbon. And there's only one option to get massive, massive energy density once they've worked out all the other issues if you don't give all the energy back with solid state and compression, and that's lithium metal. And then what you have to do is decide what your use case is. Depending on your use case, you're going to choose one of these three things as they all get to maturity and commercialization. Now, why don't we use real examples? So in terms of lithium metal, I think one of the leaders in the industry is SES. I've given you the link, so you don't have to take my word for it. You can go to them and look at their websites, and they've done some impressive stuff. They made 100 amp hour Series B cells, which is incredibly impressive. I don't know if anyone else has done that with lithium metal and a liquid electrolyte. And a liquid electrolyte is sort of critical to getting that fast charging that EVs need to fast charge. But then the question is, can lithium metal actually fast charge more than once, more than twice? Can it fast charge hundreds of cycles? And this is where, if you look at the raw data, this is the problem. If you try to charge lithium metal at C/3, which means a 3-hour charge, which is longer than almost every driver wants to charge, you only get 250 cycles. That's it. If you can charge C/10, well, now you can get 600, 700 cycles. But who wants to charge for 10 hours? Whether it's your cell phone, your vehicle, or anything. So really the conclusion I come to is, first off, some major issues need to be overcome, which is someone needs to scale lithium metal to large volume and lower prices. Someone needs to scale solvent in salt or next generation solid state, because that's necessary to get any cycle life. If you try to use commercial electrolyte with lithium metal, you'll get 20 cycles. And then last but not least, I don't know that fast charge can ever be overcome, because when you charge lithium fast, it forms dendrites. Dendrites, short cells. Short cells, well, you know what happens to that. So really, I think lithium metal makes the most sense where you can charge overnight for at least 10 hours, or you have battery swapping, where you are okay with swapping batteries and you try to swap them quickly. But even then, it's not going to be usable for anything that needs more than 3 hours of runtime. Because if you look at all their cycle life data, all of it is less than a C/3 discharge. So you have to also pay close attention to the discharge current that all the cycle life is happening. If you're discharging slower than C/10, the lithium doesn't stay flat, the lithium starts to roughen, and then that will lead in cell failure. And look, if you want to learn all about it, go to the annual merit review, Department of Energy, silicon and lithium deep dive, and there's tons more information if you really want to dig into it. But that's the same thing the national labs have come across. You need to charge slower than you discharge, which means your use case needs to be okay with charging slower than you're discharging, and that's not something you're going to discharge for a long time. Now let's go to 100% silicon. And I know you're probably surprised. Wait, you're not propping yourselves up? No, actually, I'm going to say Amprius gets the crown. Amprius has the highest energy density in the world. No, I do not secretly work for Amprius on the side. I do like the guys, though. But it's Amprius. They get 500 watt hours per kilogram, which is higher than SES was able to do in a 100 amp hour cell. They get 1,300 watt hours per liter, which is almost double the volumetric energy that SES got in a 100 amp hour cell. And these cells are only 11 amp hours, just to put in perspective. And so they have incredible fast charging. They can charge in 6 minutes. But I'd really like them to put out some more plots about repeated back-to-back fast charging. Like, don't just charge fast once or twice, but, let's see what happens if you try to charge fast 100 times. They don't need as high compression as lithium metal. They can actually work between 15 and 30 PSI, but I think their best data is at 30 PSI, which is usable in most cases. But in some cases, you really need less than 10 PSI, so that will limit applications because all these are pouch cells. They're not prismatic cells. They don't come with their own compression. And their CVD process to form the nanowires does limit the volume they can make it and the cost they can make it. Now, to be fair, they are launching a new product line, which is a silicon carbon composite, actually. And that is going to dramatically lower the price, increase the volumes they can manufacture. And we're still waiting to see third-party data from that, but that's really exciting. But that will be more of your silicon carbon area. And as I've already shown you, silicon carbon cannot hit 1,000 watt hours per liter. I think Amprius is claiming somewhere around 800 to 850 and somewhere north of 300, south of 350. But we'll wait to see what the third-party data looks like. So right now, we've sort of explained silicon seems to, for electric vehicles, for anything that needs to be charged fast and discharged slowly, it's going to be silicon. But there are issues with it. There are issues in terms of the expansion contraction can be up to 300%. Very, very few companies have scaled to large scale. There are raising a lot of money to scale to very large scale, but few have actually conquered that. I think I heard some press releases that Group 14 is close. We'll be watching eagerly to see whether they start shipping metric ton by the end of this year, or that gets delayed into next, and what the final prices look like. But the main issue here is that these structures are very complicated to make. You have to make these carbon cage-like structures impregnated with silane gas. And ultimately, that means that they're over $150 a kilogram. Why is that? Because first you have to make your carbon cage structure, which is pyrolyzing a pitch or some sort of polymer. So you have very low yield from that process. That process alone will lead to about $60 to $80 per kilogram, depending on the purity of the carbon you need. And then the silane gas is $25 to $30 a kilogram. And most of these powder-based processes get below 30% utilization from gas to active to the anode, because you use yield when you make the powders. Some of it goes in the exhaust, some of it makes powder agglomerations. You need to sift that out. Then you lose some during mixing, during coating, during calendaring, and then during the final cell making. So really the major issue is going to be how much silane actually makes it in the cell, and that's going to sort of be the lowest price you can ever go. And where China is starting to make some knockoffs of these materials, and even the knockoffs from China that have lower performance are $110 to $130 a kilogram at metric ton scale. So if even China is selling the material at over $100 a kilogram, that tells you something about the manufacturing. Now, why is it so difficult? Why is no one going above 20%? The main reason no one's going above 20% in a powder-based system is it literally rips your foil to shreds, or it delaminates, or it does both, or it causes issues with your binder system. And that's sort of limited commercial state-of-the-art cells. Now, I've heard that there are some people getting it a lot higher with silicon carbon composites. I'm still waiting for the commercial cell, the third-party validated data, to see how they do that. Some of the ways they do that is by using a lot more polymer, a lot more binder, carbon nanotubes, carbon nanostructures, pre-lithiating the silicon before you put it in. That helps a lot. If you can pre-lithiate the material before it goes into the mixing and the coating, that actually helps with the expansion. But then pre-lithiated material has a much shorter shelf life and reacts a lot more during the mixing and coating. So that has its own issues. And then ultimately, you will have to look at all these different things. And Ben, thank you for the comment. Yes, Silion was acquired by Tesla, and Tesla, that was a metallurgic grade silicon, and Tesla was not able to hit cycle life. I'm not saying that means no metallurgic silicon company will ever hit cycle life, but they were unable to hit cycle life, and now they are looking at other silicon materials that can hit acceptable cycle life. Another company working on metallurgic is Corshell, and they've hit about 300 cycles against LFP. But if you need to get the energy up if you're only going to be a sub 500 cycles, so you got to switch from LFP probably to high nickel. Pay attention to the numbers. Okay, pay attention to the numbers. You need to find out, okay, silicon can do 3,000 milliamp hours per gram. What are you doing? What's your anode rating? Is your anode rating only 500 milliamp hours per gram because it's mostly carbon and you're doing a high N to P ratio? Is it 800? Is it 1,000? And what you will find out, without exception, is the harder you run the silicon, the shorter your cycle life. The harder you run the silicon, the shorter your cycle life. And that's why most of the commercial cells we're looking at are really only running their anode around 600 milliamp hours per gram. And they're not going to super high aerial loadings. They're staying below 4.5 milliamp hours centimeter squared. They're staying below 1 gram per centimeter squared density so that the silicon has a room to expand and contract. And that's why most of them in commercial cells are below 750, but some are above 300 watt hours per kilogram because they're giving up all that volumetric energy by doing a low rating, a low density, and a low loading. Also, some companies really have to use a high N to P ratio. And what does that do? That basically runs your silicon less hard. So let's say you have 100% silicon, right? And after formation, you got 3,000 milliamp hours per gram. If you run an N to P of 2 to 1, you're only rating your silicon at 1,500. If you do an N to P of 3 to 1, you're only rating your silicon at 1,000 milliamp hours per gram. And that's how you get cycle life. You just rate it lower and lower and lower. All of a sudden, your cycle life looks better and better. So what are you doing? Trading energy for cycle life, just like every other chemistry. Now, where things change is pre-lithiation. I do believe that you're going to see a huge improvement in energy and cycle life together with pre-lithiation and with some of these expensive electrolytes like localized high concentration that Sila was doing with PNNL. Why? Because the localized high concentration form a mobile SEI, so you have a lot less lithium losses each cycle and less lithium losses during formation, but they're very, very expensive, like I was saying with SES. And then pre-lithiation, what does that do? It does 3 things for you. First, you don't run your silicon 0 to 100 anymore. Let's say you pre-lithiate 30%. Now you're only running your silicon 30 to 100, and most people don't run to 100, they run to 90. So now you're only running your silicon 30 to 90. Of course, that's going to dramatically increase your cycle life. The second thing it's going to do is give you more lithium inventory. Now you got double the lithium inventory. So you don't go to 80% state of health anymore. You go to 60% state of health or 50% state of health. But it looks like 80% state of health because you're digging into your extended range, so to speak. So last but not least, an issue is safety. Why? Graphite fails at about 80 C. The SEI starts to break down and starts to release heat and energy. That then forces the cell to about 180 where your high nickel will go, or you could ignite your electrolyte, which obviously that's going to be really, really bad. With most of these nickel-based materials, you release a ton of heat and a lot of oxygen. And guess what? Silicon loves heat and oxygen, right? It wants to be SiOX. And if you make a nanowire, a nanostructure, a nanocarbon composite, what do you got? A ton of surface area, a ton of surface area. All of that wants to interact with the gas and the heat and the byproducts. Next thing you know, these things are going up to 1,000 degrees Celsius or higher. This was a great paper in Advanced Thermal Engineering of a Samsung cell. And this cell was only 250 watt hours per kilogram and only 680 watt hours per liter, and it heated up to over 1,000. So when you go to higher energy, safety is even more critical than it was before. So now you're thinking, no wonder people are sticking with graphite. This sounds like a nightmare. Is there any way to overcome all of these things? Well, I'm glad you asked. What GDI did is we ripped it to the studs. We say, don't fight physics, don't fight chemistry. Physics and chemistry always win every single time. We made a multifunctional anode. You need to solve this on the electrode. You can't solve it with a powder. You can't solve it with a binder. You can't solve it with an electrolyte additive. You need to solve it on the whole anode. And that's exactly what Amprius does too. Amprius solves it on an anode level. They make nickel silicide nanowires. They coat that with porous silicon, and that allows for expansion contraction that doesn't cause the silicon to break up. What we did is a little different. We formed a partnership with AGC, the giant Japanese glass company, second largest glass company in the world, and Schlink, one of the leading advanced foil providers in Europe. And what we did is we took a high tensile strength copper foil that can deal with the expansion of the silicon. We put a patent protected 20 issued patents, 38 pending, to bond a monolithic layer directly to that copper. And that monolithic layer is porous. So what we did is silicon's density is normally around 2.2 grams cc. We took that down a notch to about 1.6 grams cc, but made it monolithic with low surface area. So what do you have? You got a sponge. Now when it absorbs lithium, first it fills in all those pores, then it starts to expand. And what that does is it has a very small delta per layer. Our anodes actually only expand between 10 and 15 microns per side, depending on your loading and how hard you're running the silicon. That's less than the thickness of a human hair. And what we did is we sent this to a variety of third-party cell makers who put it into cells. And as you can see, the picture on the top right is before cycling. The picture on the bottom right is after cycling, after hundreds of times. What do you notice? No wrinkled foil, no delaminated foil, no ripped foil. The anode is held together, and you can talk to our third-party cell makers. We love for them to talk to other potential customers or partners. And they said, literally, we just got the anode, put it in cells, form the cells, it's ready to rock and roll. They did not need to use external compression. They used their current electrolyte that they already used, their current separator, their current cathode, their current pouch cell material. Literally, all they did was take this anode and substitute it for their current anode. And now they don't have to mix. They don't need to coat. They don't need to dry. They don't need to deal with the yield of the anode. And they don't need next generation electrolytes to make it work for a variety of initial applications. Now, let me say very bluntly, if car companies keep pushing for over 500 cycles, if all these companies want over 500 cycles, you are going to have to use special electrolytes. You are going to have to use pre-lithiation to some degree. That's already been proven by many other companies, such as Amprius, Ion Blocks, Innovix, et cetera, et cetera. They all use pre-lithiation. They all use some nice next generation electrolyte additives, and some use a whole brand new electrolyte. And some recent papers have come out saying the future is sulfide solid state is all going to be pure silicon. And Fraunhofer has a great paper about a pure silicon against sulfide and how that overcomes a lot of the anode interface issues because sulfide is not stable with lithium metal. So what we basically got now is we said, let's see what third-party data looks like. So we worked with the co-inventor of the lithium-ion battery, the Nobel laureates, Professor Stanley Whittingham, and we sent them anode. We said, let's run it against graphite and lithium metal in fast charging. So this is specifically a 4C charge until C over 10 cutoff, 15 minutes, and a discharge of C over 3 every single time. Every single time. No rest periods, no C over 20 refresh, none of that, none of those games. Every single time 4C. And what you see is graphite, okay, it's not horrible. It's getting about 80 milliamp hours per gram out of a 220 cathode. Not great, but this is with a fancy new electrolyte and a fancy new niobium DOT 811 that sort of fought against lithium plating. And the lower cutoff voltage was only 3 volts, and it was a very thin anode. That was only 12 milligrams per centimeter squared. So that's really only about, that's under 3 milliamp hours per centimeter squared. But you know, they considered that somewhat high mass loading compared to, you know, power cells. Then they looked at lithium metal with the fancy new National Labs electrolyte. And that was, as you can see, atrocious. 60 out of 220 in 15 minutes. And by 150 cycles, you got a lot of dendrites and rough foil, so it's bouncing all over the place. And that was with tons of excess lithium. That was 250 microns of lithium, so you have all the lithium in the universe. And it still really, really struggled. Now that's compared to GDI. GDI was able to do this over 200 times back to back to back to back to back at 4C in third-party testing by Professor Whittingham's group. And this was able to show you that we could actually fast charge repeatably. And his conclusion was, look, they're getting a lot more energy out of the cathode than both lithium metal and graphite at a much higher energy density. Once again, 10 to 80% of what? 10 to 80% of what watt-hour per kilogram, what watt-hour per liter. So this is a high energy density, and you're getting a ton of it in 15 minutes. Now, we also sent anode to Navitas in Michigan, CRG in Ohio, Citatec in Spain. And what they were able to do is make 3 to 4 amp-hour pouch cells with higher energy density than Panasonic. They were able to get over 300 watt-hours per kilogram and over 800 watt-hours per liter. In the case of Citatec, they made a 6.5 amp-hour cell that hit 900 watt-hours per liter. No pre-lithiation, no next-gen electrolytes. Everything else in the cell was completely standard, completely off the shelf. And they were able to go out and hit between 800 and 900 and approaching 300 watt-hours per kilogram, depending on your choice of cathode. So the Citatec cell was a 622, so they hit 280 at 622. The Navitas and CRG were 811. So if we go to even higher nickel, obviously all those numbers will go up. And our goal is to hit 1100 by 26. Not quite as high as Amprius has hit, but once again, we're trying to make something that's more economical and more scalable. Now, what if you do use next-gen electrolytes? So this is a new non-flammable electrolyte from CRG. They literally can take a match, throw the match in the electrolyte, nothing happens. And this is a 955. This is a 955 cathode. So you're talking massive energy density here. And they were able to get over 300. I think this actually went out to 400 cycles. Once again, 10 PSI. 10 PSI, off-the-shelf cathode separator, pouch cell design. So once again, electrolytes do have a huge part to play in cycle life. And some customers are going to have to pay more for electrolyte to get better cycle life unless your application doesn't need it. And you have to get the formulation right. So electrolyte 1 had a much higher resistance. It was much more viscous. And as you can see, that actually only got about 100 cycles because you start to have a buildup in cell resistance. So you can't put in any electrolyte. You have to put in something that is tuned to your anode. So what's our business model? We want to give anode to cell factories so that cell factories can give next generation cell to battery factory companies. Now you can have a cell factory that increases its gigawatt just by switching the anode, a secure supply chain, up to 50% reduction in formation and costs. And then that will pass on to the pack makers. So this won't, at the end of the day, it will actually be cost neutral on a pack level. Once again, Ben, I see I got 5 minutes left, so please welcome everyone to rejoin for a long discussion afterwards. I will touch that in a moment. With AGC and Schlink, we are going to build our first gigafactory in Western Germany. We're not building a brand new factory. We're taking a factory that already exists, installing the AGC equipment in it, and we are going to scale from 25 megawatt hours in 26 to a gig in 29. And we have patents that protect this technology very broadly. We have 20 individual patents, 12 patent families. We were independently validated as 4th in the world for patent families in silicon dominant, and we were cited by some of the leading high energy cell companies and OEMs. We also decrease greenhouse gases by 60-80% as validated by Carbon 4. So this will be much more environmentally friendly than graphite anodes will be. And last but not least, in summary, we have shown third-party data showing that we can achieve 100% active silicon. No binder, no carbon nanotubes, just silicon. We've hit aerial loadings over 10 milliamp hours centimeter squared, densities at 1.6 grams cc and higher. We form our silicon over 3,000 milliamp hours per gram, and then you decide how you want to rate it with N to P. We've passed nail pen with 62 and 811 with carbonate electrolytes. We have 4 different third-party validators, including Binghamton University, Every single cell was under 10% cell swell during formation and initial cycling. None of them needed high compression. And we have a path to large-scale manufacturing on glass industrial equipment. Glass industrial equipment, according to AGC and Schlink, their third-party cost analysis says that this can be price parity with North American and European synthetic and natural graphite. So thanks so much for your time and attention. I'm going to start with the questions that I got in the chat, and I please welcome all of you to rejoin after the break, and we can have a much longer conversation. For overcharge, overtemp, and ESA, that's really going to come down to our cell partner. So I don't want to speak on their behalf. We are not a cell company. I have no interest in being a cell company. It takes a certain kind of company to be a cell company. We don't want to be one. So that's a question for our cell partners and what separator they use, what cathode they use, what electrolyte they use, the cell design, the pack design, the overcharge protection. That's really going to come down to the cell partners and other cell partners. The next question was talking about the silicon anode materials. Yes, that's correct. I think a lot of the silicon carbon materials will be predominantly for high-end EVs. That's why you see Mercedes and Porsche talking about these silicon carbon composites. I hope I'm wrong for the sake of climate and the sake of the world. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll find out in the next few years whether anyone other than the Porsches and Mercedes of the world can afford the silicon carbon composites. So I really think we need high silane utilization. GDI has already shown with AGC that we can achieve over 65% silane utilization, gas to anode. We don't have powder mixing, coating, yield losses. Then on the next question, oh, thanks so much, Isaac. It's great to see you. Sean, yeah, that's a really good question. So we make sure to hire patent attorneys that have a global presence. We make sure that we file those patents in Korea, China, Japan, Canada, America, South Korea, and all of Europe. And our patents are currently issued all over the world. And we will continue to file all over the world. Our strategy is to sell the silicon foil and license the IP, and to scale up foundries, basically giant glass factories that coat copper instead of glass with AGC and Schlink. TRL, MRL scale up. So right now we're at about 1 megawatt hour of proof of concept manufacturing with AGC and Schlink. We'll be at 25, just to remind everyone, we'll be at 25 megawatt hours in 26, 127, 528, and 1 gig in 209. And obviously, you know, that's our current plans, but the world's a messy place. So depending on what happens over the next 5 years, that may be delayed a little bit. Looking forward to other questions after the wrap up of the other session, but hope to see a lot of you back here. And any other questions in the chat?